Okay, that's how I sharpen chains.
Awesome. That looks so cool.
Want me behind the counter, huh? Welcome to Duff Shelley's Mower and Cycle. We've been in business here for 65 years. Thanks for coming to visit our store. When I decided to build a shop, I had a friend that drew the plans for me. I've had a lot of friends that have done good things for me. And so we drew it out, and it was 30 by 50. We started from that post there, over here 30 feet. And then we went back here 50 feet. And we got by here for a few years, pretty good. Then I decided to add on to the front here and have a showroom. This window was still there then. So we moved this window out there and built on another 25 feet out here. And that brought us out to the road. Then later on, we decided to add on to the back. And we'll come back here and I'll show you where we added on. My name is Merlin Ray Shelley. I was born July 26, 1928 in Lehigh Hospital. I grew up at 328 East Main in American Fork where my parents lived, and had a wonderful life as a young guy.
Gotcha. Utah, beautiful place, and this is
Duff.
What's it?
Duff.
Dove, like the bird.
Duff. Like a hat. A golfer.
Duff. D-U-F-F. Is that your real name or is that a nickname?
Nickname.
And your real name is?
Merlin.
Merlin. Wow. Merlin. So how does one get Duff from Merlin?
I don't know. I've had it since I was 5.
Since you were 5? Somebody said it's Duff and it just... Have you any idea why they call him that?
He got named because he always wore a little duffer ball hat from the time he was 5.
And they call you Duff.
I didn't know his name was Merlin until I married him.
Well, I always thought I had a little ball hat that I'd wear it like this, with the beak up, and so they kind of called me Duff. Neighbor across the road, Mick Ingersoll, he owned a sheep herd. I don't know if he did or one of his kids kind of nicknamed me Duff, and it kind of stuck to me. My parents called me that. My mother, Nina Mae Jones, and before she was married to a Shelley. Anyway, she grew up on a farm. My mom, she was little, she was good. She always took good care of me, and she was a good cook. She'd get out and help us. She'd take us places, me and my friends, and we grew up. We were friends. I could tell her anything, and we got along. I was a little afraid of my dad. I guess we just weren't as close as I was with my mother. She was a go-getter. She was full of spice. When she was in the 6th grade, they lived almost a mile away from the school, the old Harrington School, and at noon they'd go home for lunch. Teachers held them there and wouldn't let them go out. He was holding them for some reason, and mother, she was getting nervous because she was afraid she wouldn't be able to get home and back to school in an hour. So she climbed out the window. And so she went home, had her dinner, and come into the school, and the teacher come in, and he says, "Now, May, why don't you come back in the same way you went out? So she had to go back outside and climb back through the window. So that's the kind of gal she was. When I was born, I weighed 10 pounds. And that was pretty big for a woman who was only 4'10" tall. And my mother had a real struggle. She had a real struggle with my sister, Irene, the same thing. And the doctor told her, don't have any more kids. And so they waited 5 years, and I came along. And so he told her then, my mother bled pretty bad. She hemorrhaged, and told her, this ought to be a lesson, don't have any more kids. And so she didn't. When I was in the first grade, for Christmas, my mother ordered from Montgomery Ward or somewhere 2 bicycles, one for my sister and one for me. And she, like my sister says, she used to send 50 cents a week or something to Montgomery Ward to pay for them. And my mother worked in the fields picking things for different farmers and making money. So I was the first one in my class to have a bicycle, and I was pretty proud of that.
Christmas morning, early in the morning, they woke us up. They came home from the dance and they woke us up. And there in the front room were 2 20-inch bicycles, a boy's and a girl's. Oh my golly, excited. Duff and I grabbed, come here, all you.
Come here, Dad.
Come here. Come on. We had hands like this. Go and then they made us go back to bed.
She taught me to save. When I was a little kid, my friends worked in the fields, pulling weeds. And so I had 3 friends, and so I wanted to do it too. My mother went down to Jim Tattersall and asked him for a job for me, and he hired me. So I'd get down there, we'd ride our bikes down to his house and take our lunch, and we'd get down in the fields and crawl up and down the rows for $1 a day. And I saved my money, and my mother taught me that was before they had carpet, they had rugs. So I'd lift the corner of the rug up and put my money underneath it. That's what she taught me. So I had to save. She taught me to save. My mother used to go down and help my grandpa and take care of him and help him do different things, feed him and clean him up, bring him out and have him a bath out to our house. They didn't have running water in their house, or they didn't have an indoor toilet at those times. My mother had a lot of flowers. She liked flowers. She had 2 brothers, John. 2 of the brothers, one was John and one was Merlin. And they stayed with my grandpa, lived with him. The others were married, and they helped him. And her mother was a Rockwell before she was married to my grandpa Jones. And her grandpa was Porter Rockwell. And so that makes my Porter Rockwell my great-great-grandfather. When I was born, my dad always wanted me to be named William David after his dad. And so back in those days, when you got your name when you went to church, they named you there. It wasn't like they do now. And so I went to go to church to have me blessed in my name, and my dad wouldn't go with my mother. And so when my mother went to church, she had me named Merlin Ray. Merlin after her favorite brother, and the Ray after my dad. So when my dad came home, he thought I was going to be William David, but I was Merlin Ray from then on. There were no problems over it, so I'm kind of glad too. And my dad's name was Edmund Ray Shelley, and nobody knew that. He was Bun Shelley. Liked to sing. He and his friend Clarence Grant, whose nickname was Tabby, and my dad, they got together and they used to sing a lot. during the election times, they'd go campaign, make up songs and sing down in southern Utah. They'd have different meetings with different people, and they'd go from one to another, and they traveled with the senator sometimes, and he knew the governor. But anyway, they was pretty popular. My dad sang to over 1,000 funerals. There was a couple of times he sang to three funerals in one day. Didn't get paid, he just laid off and volunteered to do it all. And they used to sing together a lot. They had a lot of funny songs they'd sing. My dad used to like movies. He liked to go to the second show. They had an early show and then a second show, and he'd go to the second show a lot. And one time when I was little, I was down in the neighborhood about where we're at now and playing, and he hollered at me to come home. It had just turned dark, and I didn't come home. He come after me. He had a little stick in his hand, and I jumped on my bike and rode past him, and he whapped me on the back. When I got home, I hurried and took off my clothes and jumped in bed. And he come home, and I acted like I was asleep, and he says, "Come on, get up, we're going to go to the show." So he took me to the second show that night. He was always good to me. But when the war come along, my dad decided to fix up the chicken coops and raise chickens, and so he did. And he built 2 new chicken coops. One of them was the bottom one that had an egg room down under the basement of the feed department, or part of it. And that's where they'd take the eggs down and keep them cool. And I finally used that to put a lawnmower grinder down there in later years. Yeah, I've had a lot of close calls. This is where I grew up. This street right here was dirt road with railroad tracks running down the center of it. We used to play touch football out here on the road all the time when I was a kid. And this park right here was a campground in the early days. And this is the house I grew up in right here. And we used to buy penny candy. If we ever got a penny, we'd go down to the little store down to the neighbors and buy penny candy. But my dad had a few chickens at that time, and sometimes my friends would go take an egg out of the chicken coop and go down and trade it to the store owner for a piece of candy. So that's how we lived. When I was young, in front of our house was a train run right down the center of the railroad tracks. It was an electric train that run from the wires on top, and it ran for a long time. They finally took it out in about 1946. For vacations, when we was young, my parents used to take us to Yellowstone, and we went up there and we'd go fishing. My dad loved to fish. We'd stay in the cabins up there, and it was really fun. When I was little, my father's father died when he was 45 years old. And my grandma remarried a guy, and he had a ranch up above Heber called Jack Berg's Ranch. And when I was a little kid, we used to go up there a lot. They had some cabins built up there, and we'd have a big program around the bonfire at nights. And then in the morning, the men would get up and go fishing. It was just a fun time. So my grandpa was Grandpa Berg. I didn't know. I never did try to figure out why the name was Shelley and his name was Berg. Never entered my mind. I always liked horses, so I never did get one, but I had friends that had horses. I had one friend, Muggs McAllister. His dad had horses and some cows, and so when I was about 11 years old, I'd get down and help him milk the cows, and then we'd get on the horses and drive the cows down the road to the pasture. Then that night we'd ride the horses down and bring the cows back, and I'd help him milk them. But this friend of mine, we went one time up to Berg's Ranch, and we were fishing. We could see the fish underneath us swimming around, and Muggs got one on. I said, "Muggs, you got one." And he didn't do anything. And I said, "Muggs, you got one." He still didn't. I turned to look at him, and he peeled over forward, fell face down in the lake, dropped his pole. So I hollered, "Dad, Muggs fell in." And I jumped in and swam over to him and got him, drug him over to the side and held his head up till Dad and Frank Brown came, and they took him out.
But it sounds like you saved Muggs' life. Is that?
I did. I was 11 years old then, and I would have probably gotten a Boy Scout life-saving deal, but I was only 11. I wasn't a scout yet. Later on, Muggs and I, we were good friends. We later found out that Muggs had epilepsy, and we didn't ever know it. When I was in high school, I bought an old Model A 28 or 29 Model A coupe off of my neighbor for $100. And I drove that for a couple of years, and it was a fun time. That was the first car I ever had. I loved sports. I used to play baseball and play basketball. We used to have track meets and high jump, and the neighbor had a rug that had a bamboo pole in it. And he sold it to me for $0.25, and I wrapped tape around it to make it strong, and I learned to be a pole vaulter with that. But in basketball, I always dreamed of being on the basketball team, and when I was a sophomore, I figured, well, I'll never make it. But when I was a junior, I made the team, and I was one of the starting five to start for preseason. And the night of the first game, I come home from school, ready to go back to the school, and my dad says, "You're not starting tonight." He says, "Shug Seastrand is." I didn't hardly believe him, but when we got up there, that's the way it worked out. I don't know if I even played in that game. We had one more game, and Muggs McAllister and two of the other guys had sloughed, and they wouldn't let them go to the ball game that day, and I got to start. And I must have played pretty good, because I started that the rest of the year. And when we finally made it, got to go to the tournament, high school tournament, the beat class, and what we wanted to at least win one game so we could stay all 3 days. We won the first one, and we won the second one, and so we got to play for the state championship against Wasatch. They beat us, and the paper come out, and I was down with 4 other guys that made the All-State, first team. Couldn't hardly believe it. Anyway, we lost that afternoon. It was in the Desert News, and that afternoon we lost to Wasatch. The next year, we had a team. Our coach got drafted into the Army, and so we had another coach, was his helper, and we had a really good team. We never lost a game all year. And during the season, we played Grantsville, and we whopped them. And we went to the tournament. We were kind of big heads. We were overconfident. We knew we was going to win, and we won the first 3 games. And anyway, we went to play for the championship, and we were in a dressing room, and the door was open, and here come the Grantsville team walking by the door past us. We saw them walking by, and the coach, he stopped and poked his head in, and he says, "Take it easy on us tonight, guys." And we were already overconfident. Anyway, the game ended. They beat us 1 point. The only game the whole year we lost, and that was for the state championship. We all cried. But we were overconfident, and we should have got beat because of that. We knew we was going to win. I had an offer to go to Utah State, and so I went up there. I had a scholarship there to be on the basketball team, and I made the team. And anyway, I got to go back to New York with him on a barnstorm tour, and we played at Madison Square Garden. We played against Long Island, and we were getting beat bad, and I sit there wanting to get in the game, and the coach about 3 minutes ago said, "Shelley, take off your sweats," and I was mad. I wanted to get in earlier, and so I went in and for 45 seconds, and I got the hold of the ball. I shot it. It hit the hoop, but it didn't go in. So at least I got to play in Madison Square Garden for 45 seconds. And the next year, they changed coaches, and I didn't make the team. I got cut. When I started college, that's the first year that the veterans come home from the war. So I was competing against guys older than me. So that was the end of my basketball career. Well, I went on in athletics. I decided I wanted to get a letter, and so I got on the wrestling team. I wrestled 145 pounds the first year, and during one of the matches, the coach says, "Whatever you do, don't get pinned, because that costs 5 points, and if you just get beat, it's 3 points against you." So I wrestled, and the next year I lost weight, went down to 136 pounds. I think I got third in the conference. But anyway, I never did get pinned. That was the end of my athletics. Then at Utah State, we had to take ROTC the first 2 years we were there. I was required for people that hadn't been in the service. After the first 2 years, if you took advanced ROTC for 2 years, they paid you 90 cents a day for 2 years. That bought my gas, so I joined. And at the end, I graduated. I graduated with a degree in physical education and a minor in recreation. I decided I was going to be a school teacher. I wanted to be a coach. And I found out you got to teach other things too, you know, and I didn't like to get up in front of people. In the gym, I'd been fine. But anyway, I was going to not go back my senior year, but I had a friend back there that was a veteran, and he said, he was from back east, and he says, "Come back and go to finish." He says, "If you get a degree, it'll always help you get a job." And when I went to Geneva, that helped me get my job, and I got 2 classes higher. I graduated from Utah State in 1950, and I worked at the feed mill for a while. And during the summer, I went over to Strawberry Days with my friend Lee Parker, who I worked with at the same time at the feed mill. And there we met a couple of girls that were there that night that he knew. And so he introduced me to both of them. One of them was LaVon Fountain. And so we talked, and we did a few things around the carnival. And then that night, I took Lillian home from the carnival, and Lee took LaVon home. So a couple of weeks later, I was over to Lehigh Roundup, and I run into LaVon with another girlfriend over there. So I talked to her, and I got her phone number, and we kind of started talking back and forth. So I started dating her, and I used to go over to meet her about every night. And finally, we decided to get married.
So let's go back now, before even you were married more than 62 years ago. Let's go back a few more years. Do you remember the very first time you saw Duff? The very first time you ever said, do you remember where you were and what you were doing?
Yeah,
What was happening?
I'm not going to tell you.
You can whisper.
We were at a carnival, you know, what do you call it, amusement park.
Like an amusement park.
I was introduced to him by a friend that knew us both.
So the friend said, I know this beautiful lady and I know this handsome man, and I think they would be together. And you were at the carnival, and that's when you saw her. And would you say it was love at first sight?
No.
Very, very obvious. Just no. Were you seeing someone else at the time?
I took a girlfriend home that night.
You took a girlfriend home. Do you remember who that was?
Yes, my best friend.
Oh! So, why did you go home with the best friend?
I don't know, my best friend took her home.
It's a very tight-knit community in Utah, isn't it? So, you were with his best friend and you were with her best friend, but at some point you realized that he wasn't good for you and she wasn't good for you, and you dumped them both and ended up together.
We switched the next carnival.
Oh, the next carnival was like a sort of an annual tradition, was it? I see. So, here you are, you've been married for 62 years and you both look fantastic. Let me ask you a question from a lady's point of view. All these ladies on there on the road to marriage, what's the secret from a lady's point of view? Any advice you can give the girls out there?
Don't ever try to change your husband, because they don't.
Don't try and change them. Look at the men, look at the men. Yeah, yeah. Hear that, honey? Wow, you got your
Standing ovation.
Yes. You've just become a folk hero to those men.
I used to go over to meet her about every night. Finally, we decided to get married. I decided to get married. She wanted to go to college. She wanted to go to college, and I told her I don't want to get married. So anyway, we decided to get married. She wanted to ask her parents what to do, and they told her to get married, I guess, to me. So we got married, and she was good looking. She had a good shape. She was friendly. I don't know what it was. I think I'd decided it was time to get married. And she looked like a pretty good one. I thought all women were like my mother, but they weren't. Everybody's different. But she wasn't the same as my mother, but she was sure great, and she made up for the things that she wasn't like my mother in a lot of other ways. Home builders, and she'd ride up to Salt Lake every morning with her dad. He was a cement finisher, and she'd ride with him up to 21st South or so, and then he'd let her off and she'd take the bus up to where she worked, and they'd meet after her. One night on the 19th, I believe it was, of January 51, they were coming home, and it was a bad snowstorm, and it was the same night, it was a Friday night, BYU was playing Utah basketball, a lot of traffic on the road, the old road. This is before freeways, and they were coming home, and just before you get to Lehigh, there was a car coming north that got out of control and shot in front of them, and they hit him broadside, and LaVon's head went through the windshield and then come back, and she was cut really bad on her face, broke her leg and her ankle. The undertaker at American Fork had a hearse. He and his son drove to Lehigh and hauled her dad to the Lehigh hospital while they wrapped LaVon up, and then they brought her to the new American Fork hospital. And we were going to eat supper over to my parents' home that night, and I was over there waiting for her to come. And about 6:30, her sister, LaRue, twin sister, called me and said we got in an accident. She's up at the hospital, American Fork now. Dad's over to Lehigh in the hospital, so I told my parents, well, I'll go up and get her. And I walked through the front door, and I looked down the hall at the hospital, and down the end of the hall was a highway patrolman and the undertaker down there. And I went down, and they said, your wife's in a bad accident there. So I went and looked through a window, and I could see him in there working on her. So I went down the hall towards the operating room, and I went in the next room and said a prayer that she'd be all right. And I went on around and went in and sit on a stool and watched the Dr. Guy Richards sew her face up, and she was cut from here down, around, up to here, over her nose and to here. It was wide open. You could look in there. You could see her teeth right from here. It was bad. And she was laying there. She was unconscious, but she kept saying things. How's Daddy? And where's Duff? And she'd say, oh, I'll be so ugly. And she just kept going through those things. And anyway, I just sit there and watched him, and the guy Richie says, he started sewing her up from the inside out, you know, and he says, how's her lips? Was her lips full or what? And so, anyway, I can't remember what I said, but anyway, he sewed her up. It was pretty late that night when he got through, and she was in the hospital for at least 3 or 4 weeks. So she went through a lot, and then she, after this, it cut the nerves in the side of her face, and her face was crooked. When she'd smile or anything, it'd all go to one side, and people would look at you, you know, and you'd want to hit them because they'd stare at you. And I got a commission in the Air Force Reserve as a second lieutenant. I didn't think they'd ever be called, and I had to sign that I'd serve for at least 2 years if called on. I figured the wars were all over with then. But when the Korean deal came about, I got called in for 2 years. We had to serve. We were called to go back to Ypsilanti, Michigan, and report in. And so Yvonne and I, we drove back there. She was pregnant with Mike. This was in 1st of July, and she was expecting in December. But anyway, we drove back to Ypsilanti, and I went in there for a couple of days, and they said, we've got an opening in Chicago and one in Louisville, Kentucky. He says, which one would you rather go to? I says, you pick me one. He said, okay, you're going to Chicago. But I was glad for that later on because I got to know Chicago. We were stationed in the east wing of the Museum of Science and Industry, a big, wonderful place. The Air Force had the east wing leased out. And so I spent a year there. And so I got to know Chicago real well. Mike was born there. He was born in the Michael Reese Hospital. So that's probably the reason we named him Michael. And then we got transferred down to Kewanee, Illinois, and then Christine was born. I had 4 airmen down there. We had under me. I was their leader. Home defense thing. Worried about the Russians flying over the North Pole under radar, and we had people registered to report any airplanes coming in under low flying, and so we had to visit. I had 120 towns that I was responsible for, and so I assigned each airman 30 towns, and that they had to report back once a month. And so that's what we did. Then the war ended, and anyway, then I come home and went back to my job at Geneva. And so year after we got married, the summer after, decided Levon and I'd go to Yellowstone. So we drove up to Yellowstone. We left after the dance. They used to have dances at the Polo Hall in Latona. That's the dance hall my dad did part of it. And at midnight they ended. So Levon and I got in our car and headed for Yellowstone at midnight. We got up there early at Old Faithful, and we got a cabin and decided we'd go in and have a nap. And we were going to go to the dance they had there that evening. So we laid down to have a nap. We woke up the next morning. We missed the dance. Anyway, then we went over to Fishing Bridge, and we had a good time. And then a few years later, after Mike was born, we went to Yellowstone with Irene and Bill and a couple of their kids, and we all went up there and we fished. We got pictures of us in a boat, I think. We had a good time. We liked to drive. We stopped for gas and go to the restroom. We'd eat on the way. Had a lot of good time. A lot of people wouldn't like that, but we sure did.
What would you do on the road to pass the time?
Oh, listen to music and stuff and play cards. We had a little game. What do they call it? She had a little platform here while I was driving. I could hold my cards and drive, and we could Blitz, they called it, I think. And we played that, different things. She didn't do much driving. I did all the driving. When I decided to go to Disneyland, I had a pickup truck with a sleeper on the back and a boot in between so you could crawl back and forth. Had a bed made back there, the length of it. And so we decided to go to Disneyland. It was in March when they weren't busy. And so my mother and dad and Levon and the 4 kids picked me up at Geneva at 11 o'clock. And I jumped in the driver's seat, and Levon and I guess Dad and my mother was sitting in the front. We could sit 4 in the front seat. We headed for California. We got down to Las Vegas about 5 in the morning, and we pulled into a place and had $1 breakfast, and we all had breakfast. Went back out, got in. We got down to Disneyland just as they opened, and we went in and spent the day in there. And we come out when they closed, and then we opened up the back door of the sleeper, and Mother and Levon fixed us a bite to eat there, and we jumped in the car and headed home. And we got home early in the morning, and the kids went to school, and I think Diane's teacher asked her, "Where were you yesterday? You were gone." And she said, "Oh, I went to Disneyland," and the teacher wouldn't believe her. So I've had it so I could go without sleep pretty good, and I like to drive a lot. I was also a finance clerk for the ward where we lived on Columbia Village, and I noticed in there they had different categories where the money come in and go into different departments. So I decided I was going to be on a budget and live within my means. And so I sat down and I figured out every expense we had. I had everything. I had permanent waves, I had vacations, I had phone bill, I had everything. And Christmas, I had a little department there, and so I knew how much I had to put into that every month. I had tires for the car, it was just maybe 50 cents here and there, but I made it so it balanced. When I first made it up, I was spending more than I was taking in, so I cut each one of them down to where I made it balance. And by doing that, I had a balance about $500 in the bank all the time. So I lived by my budget, and the extra money I made on the side went in until I finally got all of them up to date. But anyway, it was a good experience. When they say have a budget, that's the way I lived within my means. So that's what working as a ward clerk taught me, or how to handle it all. Well, Yvonne always bought lots of things for the kids, and we always had to decorate Christmas. And that must have been the first year we was back out of the Air Force, because Christine's still crawling. Yvonne's fixing things up. For Mike, I and Bill had a little horse, rocking horse. And so I made one. Didn't want to buy one. I made one. That one there I did the whole thing. And we had lots of Christmas pictures. And Mike on his horse. I was real proud of that horse.
In a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of heavenly hosts praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men. And it came.
Oh yeah, I cut the kids' hair. I bought a pair of clippers, and so I cut the kids' hair. You could see that. I used to cut my dad's hair and cut my father-in-law's hair. I started that when I was at Geneva. This sounded like I had a pretty hard job, doesn't it? Now I'm cutting David's hair, when he was just a little tiny one. He didn't like it either. He'd never had it. That's his first haircut, I think. I worked at the feed mill. When I first got married, I was working there, and finally decided that if I get a job at the steel plant, I could get a retirement later on. And so I went down there and applied, and I got hired. And at Geneva, I worked as a train clerk. When I first worked there, I worked as a scaleman. I weighed the railroad trains, and I did that for 9 months, and then I got called in the Air Force for 2 years. And when I returned from the Air Force, I went back and they put me as a train clerk in the railroad department. So I worked there for how many years? 30 more years. And the last jobs I was on, there was 4 of us on this job, and we were salaried. Didn't make lots of money, but we didn't have to punch a time clock. And so if we wanted a day off or something, somebody would double over and fill in for you, and we turn our time in the way we were scheduled, so there was no problem, no overtime. I worked straight graveyard. I worked my graveyards, and the 2 of the guys didn't like graveyards, so I worked their graveyards, and one of them worked my swings, and the other one worked my days. So I never missed a ball game or a deer hunt or anything I wanted, because somebody'd always trade with you. So that was kind of a blessing we had. The last few years I worked straight graveyard, and anyway, I didn't sleep much. I'd come home from work, I'd go to work at 11 o'clock at night and come home at 7 and eat breakfast and come out in the shop and work till 6 or 7 and go in and eat supper and go to bed. And 11:15, they'd wake me up, and I'd throw my clothes on and I'd speed to Geneva and hit the gate right on the time. Anyway. Let me show you how I sharpen a lawnmower blade. That's a grinder I got out of, I learned about when I was back at Nauvoo. So I just turn it on and then we take it over here and see if it's balanced. See, that's pretty well balanced. So it's good on both sides. During the Depression, when I grew up, a lot of people lost their homes, and I wanted to have my house paid off. So to get some extra money, I worked for the nursery and saved, and then one day there was a guy around the corner had a lawnmower grinder that sharpened real type lawnmowers for sale, and I asked my neighbor, "Why don't you buy that?" And he says, "Why don't you?" And I had $150 coming from the nursery, so I took that and went and bought that grinder. I put it down the basement of my dad's chicken coop down the egg room, and I think I sharpened 40 lawnmowers that year, and I had to carry them down and carry them back up. To learn how to sharpen them, I used my dad's lawnmower. Had a brand new Jacobson lawnmower, was the best you could buy, and I started learning how to with it. And I nicked one blade, and so I ground them all the same to match up or ruin his lawnmower. Learning how. And that next year, I took the money I got out of the Air Force with and bought a new grinder, had it shipped in. And then my mother, I was down in the basement, my mother says, "If you want to build a garage behind your house, I'll buy the materials if you want to build it." And so I built a 2-car garage behind their house, and it's still there. Anyway, my neighbor next door, Ed Colgrove, he knew how to lay blocks, and so he helped me lay the blocks. I laid some of them, he laid most of them. And my Uncle John, he helped me put the roof on, and my father-in-law, he was a cement finisher, he finished the cement for me, and so I operated out of there. And for 4 or 5 years.
Oh, this device I bought off the guy in Salt Lake when I first started to be in business. He sold me this vise. It's a big vise, and a drill press, and a big anvil for $75. And then I built this bench here. This was a year after I started in business. Went and bought this steel and had somebody bend it, so I mounted a device on top of it. And this was the work area. I had 2 doors here that we could go in and out of, and the wall went over to here. And one time when I decided to add on to the other part, I had to we tore the house down, and we burned it up. Anyway, then I decided to burn garbage in the open basement they had, which was about 8 by 8, the little basement. And I put garbage in there, mostly cardboard, and I'd burn it. Pretty soon the fire chief come to me and says, "You got to quit burning there. It's getting calls at 3 o'clock in the morning from the people down the road who thought you had a fire." So I decided I'll have one more burn. I had a whole bunch of cardboard to burn. And so I put it all in there, and I went and got 3 gallons of gas and poured on top of it. And I stood on the foundation. I got a piece of paper, and I lit it, and I reached over like this and dropped it on top. And all at once it started to flare up, and all at once, kaboom! It blew up. It sucked the windows out of the house next door. I had cardboard burning on top of the roof and on telephone wires out here. And there's a window over here. If you come over and look, it sucked the window right out. It sucked the glass right out. The thing, and I was standing right at the edge of it, and it didn't do a thing to me. Can't believe how blessed I've been. How lucky, you know. You know that when that explosion, it sucked it out, and I was standing on the other side of it, and it didn't do anything to me and the guy that was with me. But anyway, we're pretty lucky. What else can I tell you? When I was over to Grandma's, over to my parents' house there in the garage, they came out with a machine called a tote goat. And I had a neighbor that built one. He built it. And so my friend Marv Cook and I decided we were going to have a couple of tote goats, and we make them. So we went and copied our friends. We made not blueprint, but copies of how the bends were and everything. And we went and bought some conduit and made the frame out of conduit, made 2 of them. And I got the wheels and lawnmower, real barrel wheels, and put sprockets on them. And then I built a couple of used engines, and we got a clutch to put on, and we were happy. We built our own tote goat. And so I liked it so well. I went down to the tote goat factory, and the guy took me for a ride. Old Ralph Bonham, he's the guy that invented him. He took me for a ride and asked him about a dealership, and so I got a dealership on him. So I sold tote goats. They used to have races. You'd around a course, they'd set the course out, and they'd have people go out and check to make sure you went around them. And it was a timed race. You'd draw numbers before to get your starting point. You'd start whatever your number was, and they'd let you go for a minute, and then the next guy would go. And you'd timed. I did pretty good on that.
Well, everybody, this little shop is where the history began with Duff Shelley.
It's not actually that little, Rita.
Oh, it's huge.
Anyway, amongst all the things we've learned about Duff being in this business for 6 decades, we learned that Duff is actually a world champion tote goat racer. And
it was national, not a world.
Okay, well, national
well,
champ, world champ.
But you were #1. You were like the reigning champ.
Well, I was for a little while.
You weren't even a spring chicken back then. What? I mean,
I was probably 40.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so impressed.
That was like 50 years ago.
You're a great.
And then they started having some letting some motorcycles into it. And so one guy had a Kawasaki motorcycle on there. So I went up to Salt Lake to the General Implement and asked about getting a dealership for Kawasaki's. She says you got to buy 6 machines to get it. So I bought 6 motorcycles. Now, to get them, you'd have to have a couple $1 million to be able to, somebody to give you a dealership. That's how I got into the Kawasaki dealership. And we've been a dealership now for 52 years. So we've been a Kawasaki dealer for a long time. And in the meantime, Kawasaki had snowmobiles in '79. We had them for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years, and then they decided not to make them anymore. And so we applied to get Polaris dealership and they give it to us. And that's how we got into the Polaris end of it. Our neighbor told us we ought to come and buy a cabin. Then this guy that owned it, Al Bowen, I got to know him pretty good, and he says, "Why don't you buy my cabin?" I told him I couldn't afford it, I didn't need it. And I'd never seen it other than we looked in the window middle of January, and he says, "I got somebody going to buy my cabin." He says, "Meet me up at the dam at 6 o'clock tonight." So Mike and I loaded our snowmobiles, and we met him up at the dam, and we got on and we rode up to the cabin, and we went in and looked it over. He went and started the generator, so we had lights, and he showed us downstairs, and then we went upstairs, and he looked it all over, and we come downstairs, and he says, "Everything goes with it but the dishes." And just then I heard a snowmobile pull up outside. I said, "I'll take it." The spur of the moment, I bought the cabin. And he went outside, and I heard the guy say, "Hey, I've got my earnest money and my agreement down at my truck at the dam." And Al says, "This guy just bought it." So that's how we ended up getting the cabin. And we've made quite a few changes to it since then. It's really a nice place now. Okay. They went on their trips. They went on 2 or 3 trips, she and all her sisters. And then they decided they was going to get a van and all buy it together so they could go in a van on these trips. And so they went up to Salt Lake. She called me I was down in Geneva. She called me down there, and she says, hey, we found a van, a Volkswagen van, camper van. He says, we're going to buy it, all of us. Is that okay? And I says, you're not going to buy with your sisters any vans. Yeah, I'm against it. Anyway, when I come home that afternoon, there was a green van sitting in the driveway. She bought it herself. She used the money that she got from her mother's inheritance and bought this van, and I wasn't too happy about it. I thought she was nuts. And we decided to go on a trip, and I took Mother and Dad and Levon and David, and we went down to southern Utah, and at night we put the bed out. Mother and Dad slept downstairs, Levon and I slept upstairs, up the top, and we had a hammock across the driver's seat, and David slept there. And I fell in love with that van, so we went on lots of trips in that van. We went back east a few times. We wanted to travel a little bit. Diane went to Israel for 6 months abroad for BYU. Levon wanted to go over there and see her while she's over there. So we arranged to go, and we took my mother and dad with us. We went over and had the best trip we've had to Israel. Had a really good one. We had lots of good trips. The last trip we had, Levon and I left American Fork. We went back to the International Lawn and Garden Show in Louisville, and we left here early in the morning, and that evening we were in Lincoln, Nebraska, and Robert fixed us up at a hotel there, and we ate and slept, and next morning we got up, and that afternoon we were in Louisville. So Christine lined us up with a lot of different trips and made reservations for us. We went to Europe, we went to Japan, we went to Hong Kong. Where did we go? We went all over, though. As we got older and I retired from Geneva, Levon kind of wanted to go on a mission, so she probably was the pressure of it. So we talked about it, and we didn't know if I was still working in the shop all the time and didn't know how to get away. And Irene and Bill was missionaries down in Provo in the Utah mission. She called me up one day and says, I've got just the mission for you. He says, 6 months at Cove Fort. And she told me what to do, and so I called Levon, and we got in the car and we drove down to Cove Fort and had a guy take us, one of the missionaries took us for a tour through there, and he says, you ought to come down here and go on a mission. I said, that's what we come down for. He said, well, come on. So he took us over to the mission director. The mission director was Sherm Hinckley, and he's a brother to President Hinckley. And so we talked to him. He says, where do you live? I said, American Fork. He said, well, we don't want you down here. You want to go home every weekend. I said, no, we'll be down here. So we got the mission call, and in 2 weeks we were down at Cove Fort. But we had to stay in, they didn't have a place for us there, so we stayed in a campground at Fillmore. And we stayed there for 3 months, and then they fixed a place down at Cove Fort. We moved our trailer down there, and we were there, and we had a blast. We really enjoyed it.
What'd you do day to day at Cove Fort?
Gave tours, and then I mowed the lawns down there. I arranged to get them a Walker lawnmower down there.
This first room is the Stagecoach and Postal Express office. And the Stagecoach used to come through here every day. One would go north this way, and one would go south. And when they'd pull up out here, they'd have to change horses. And the
Pioneer Day, isn't it? 24th of July. Well, it's hard to talk about this part without talking about our church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, because that's what motivated the Hickory families that come down here and build the fort, was their faith and obedience to when the prophet called them President Brigham Young.
So I did that. We had a good time, and after we were there, we come home. That was in 1996, and Chris found us a house in Highland, and so we bought that. And Levon wanted to go on another mission, and we went to, she had a neighbor up there she was home teaching to, and her husband was an architect, and he was working with Nauvoo on the temple. And she told this woman, said, we'd like to go on a mission back there. What do you do? Well, my husband, he's worked doing in the shop and things. And so through him, we were back there in a couple of weeks on a mission for a year and a half. We had a good time back there. Well, in Nauvoo, what I had to do, I worked in the garage. I'd sharpen the lawnmowers and do different things there. And every day at 10 o'clock, all the workers would come in. There was probably 30 or 40 missionaries there that was working different things. There was plumbers, there was electricians, carpenters, and everything. They had a break at 10 o'clock. So they had a big pot there. It was the end of a big propane tank. They made it, you could pop popcorn in it. So I took over the popcorn making job, and I'd make a big batch, a whole tub full of it. These guys would come in and eat popcorn and talk for 10 o'clock every day. So I kind of got that job. We were back there. They had a play called Rendezvous every night that people they'd put on this production, and they kept trying to get us to get into it. We fought it for 6 months, and finally they come and, will you be the curtain puller? And I didn't want to be the curtain puller. And they says, well, you can be the square dance caller. So I learned the square dance caller. First night I forgot halfway through it, and they just kept right on dancing. Anyway, and every night I'd pray for her and go there that I'd do it, and I made it. And we'd be on the stage, and I was always kind of shy. And on this play, I kind of changed my life a bit. It made me a little more outgoing. And so I look forward to that production every night. We do it 3 times a week, sometimes twice a night. When they dedicated the temple back there, we were there. We got to watch them put the statue on top, Angel Moroni. And well, Levon and I didn't always get along the best, you know. We finally got to be close to each other, especially the last year and a half. She was here. I took care of her, and we got really close then. And we were close anyway, but we never expressed it much till then. I enjoyed it. I was thankful that I had that last year and a half to help take care of her, pay her back a little bit. My dad and his friend Tabby Grant used to go around singing lots of songs, and so I'm going to sing one. The one I'm going to sing now is Adam's Rib. A long, long time ago, as everyone should know, as Adam slept beneath the apple tree, an angel came one day and took one rib away and made a woman of it for Adam's company. I had an x-ray taken and the doctor said to me, you have one rib a-missing from your